18.5 minutes. That's all it took to potentially save or destroy a presidency. But what Nixon and his secretary erased from those White House tapes in 1973 remains one of America's greatest political mysteries. On June 20th, 1972, just 3 days after the Watergate break-in, President Nixon had a crucial conversation with his chief of staff that could have revealed everything. But when investigators finally got their hands on the tape, they discovered a deliberate gap where the most damning evidence should have been. Today, we're diving deep into the missing 18 minutes that changed American history forever. And I'll reveal what experts believe was actually said during those erased moments. The setup. Picture this. It's June 1972, and 5 men have just been caught breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex. Among them, James McCord, a former CIA operative, who also happens to work for Nixon's re-election committee. The connection is immediate, the implications devastating. But here's where the story gets interesting. Nixon wasn't just dealing with a simple burglary. This was a sophisticated intelligence operation gone wrong, involving wiretapping, document theft, and political espionage at the highest levels. And Nixon knew it. 3 days after the break-in, on June 20th at 11:26 a.m., Nixon sits down with H.R. Haldeman, his chief of staff and closest confidant. This isn't just any conversation. This is the moment where damage control begins. Haldeman has just returned from meetings with senior officials, including FBI Associate Director Mark Felt. Yes, the man who would later be revealed as Deep Throat. The discovery fast forward to July 1973. Alexander Butterfield, a former White House aide, drops a bombshell during congressional testimony. The White House has been recording everything. Every conversation, everything. Every presidential meeting since 1971, all captured on a sophisticated taping system that Nixon had installed. Suddenly, the investigation has a smoking gun. If Nixon was involved in covering up Watergate, the evidence would be right there on tape. Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox immediately subpoenas the recordings, setting up a constitutional crisis that would ultimately bring down a presidency. But when the tapes are finally handed over, investigators make a shocking discovery. The June 20th conversation between Nixon and Haldeman, the one that could prove Nixon's early knowledge of the cover-up, has been deliberately erased. The technical mystery. The erasure wasn't accidental. Audio experts brought in by the court determined that someone had to physically hold down the record button while simultaneously pressing play and fast forward for exactly 18.5 minutes. This required deliberate, sustained effort, what investigators called manual operation. Rosemary Woods, Nixon's loyal secretary of 22 years, initially claimed she accidentally erased 5 minutes while transcribing the tape. She demonstrated her explanation in what became known as the Rosemary stretch, awkwardly reaching across her desk to answer a phone while her foot supposedly hit the pedal. But even she couldn't account for the remaining 13 minutes. The White House brought in their own experts, claiming the gap was caused by some sort of sinister force. But court-appointed specialists concluded otherwise. This was intentional destruction of evidence, and it happened sometime between the subpoena and the tape's delivery. The political earthquake. This wasn't just about missing audio. It was about the systematic destruction of evidence in a criminal investigation. The gap occurred during the exact time frame when Nixon would have first learned about his campaign's involvement in Watergate. The timing was too perfect, too convenient to be coincident. What we know was happening. To understand what might have been erased, we need to look at what was happening around June 20th, 1972. The FBI was already connecting the burglars to Nixon's re-election committee. John Mitchell, Nixon's former attorney general and campaign manager, was in crisis mode. The CIA was being pressured to claim the break-in was their operation to throw the FBI off the trail. Haldeman's notes from that period, discovered years later, show entries like "keep under control" and "PR offensive to top this." These weren't the notes of someone managing a minor political embarrassment. These were the strategies of a cover-up already in motion. We also know that on June 23rd, just 3 days after the erased conversation, Nixon and Haldeman had another recorded discussion where they explicitly talked about using the CIA to obstruct the FBI investigation. This became known as the smoking gun tape. The reconstruction attempts. Over the decades, various experts have tried to recover the erased material using increasingly sophisticated technology. In the 1970s, they used magnetic analysis to detect traces of the original recording. In the 2000s, digital forensic specialists attempted to reconstruct the audio using advanced algorithms. None of these efforts succeeded in recovering the actual words, but they did reveal something crucial. The tape had been deliberately and expertly erased multiple times in different directions, showing clear intent to permanently destroy the evidence. The suspects. While Rosemary Woods took initial responsibility, investigators quickly determined she couldn't have made the entire erasure. The technical requirements and the pattern of the gap suggested someone with more sophisticated knowledge of the recording system. Suspicion fell on several key figures. Haldeman himself, who had intimate knowledge of the taping system. Eyal, Nixon's chief of staff after Haldeman's resignation, who oversaw the tape's preparation for investigators. And even Nixon personally, who had access to the recordings and every motive to destroy damaging evidence. But here's what makes this case so fascinating. We may never know who physically made the erasure, but we can piece together what was probably discussed. The smoking gun theory, based on Haldeman's contemporaneous notes, FBI records, and the conversation that occurred just 3 days later. Experts believe the June 20th discussion covered several explosive topics. First, Nixon likely learned the full scope of his campaign's involvement in Watergate, including the participation of high-level officials like Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt. This wasn't just about 5 burglars. This was about a systematic espionage operation run by his own people. Second, they almost certainly discussed the immediate cover-up strategy, including how to distance the White House, the burglars, and how to handle the inevitable FBI investigation. The conversation probably included specific instructions about paying hush money and providing legal support to the arrested men. Most damaging of all, Nixon likely gave explicit approval for the plan they would execute 3 days later, using the CIA to claim national security implications and shut down the FBI investigation. This wasn't just knowledge of a cover-up. This was presidential authorization of obstruction of justice. The fatal decision. The erasure of those 18 minutes might have been the biggest mistake of Nixon's presidency. By destroying the evidence, he created a gap that screamed guilt louder than any conversation could have. The missing minutes became a symbol of Nixon's paranoia and contempt for the law. Ironically, if Nixon had simply released the tape with whatever damaging content it contained, he might have survived. Americans had shown they could forgive presidential mistakes, but couldn't forgive the systematic destruction of evidence and the constitutional crisis that followed. The missing 18 minutes represent more than just erased audio. They symbolize the moment American democracy proved it was stronger than any individual, even the president. While we may never know exactly what Nixon and Haldeman discussed on June 20th, 1972, the attempt to hide it ultimately revealed everything we needed to know about Nixon's character and his contempt for the rule of law. The gap also established crucial precedents about executive privilege, the independence of law enforcement, and the principle that no one, not even the president, is above the law. These lessons remain relevant today as we continue to grapple with questions about presidential power and accountability. What's most remarkable is that Nixon's downfall came not from what he said, but from what he tried to hide. Those missing 18 minutes became the silence that spoke volumes about power, corruption, and the lengths people will go to protect themselves. The mystery of exactly what was erased may never be solved, but its impact on American politics and law enforcement continues to shape our democracy half a century later. Sometimes, what's missing tells us more than what's there. But Nixon's downfall was just the beginning of Watergate's impact on American politics. Click the next video to discover how Deep Throat's identity remained hidden for over 30 years and changed investigative journalism forever.